They slaughtered 20.
A Blade Runner's job is to hunt down replicants. Manufactured humans you can't tell from the real thing.
Day 1000 of the Siege of Seattle.
The Muslim community demands an end to the army's occupation of mosques.
The Homeland Security Bill is ratified. After 8 years, British borders will remain closed.
That's reserved for members of our Prime Flight program. You got to be a 4.2 or over to qualify.
Oh, I'm a 4.2.
I'm afraid you're actually a 4.183.
These days, it often feels like we're living in the prelude to a not-so-distant dystopian science fiction future. My next guest, Cory Doctorow, says science fiction is a barometer for any given moment.
Science fiction doesn't predict the world, but the science fiction that's popular in any moment gives you this incredible insight into what's on the world's mind, what its fears and aspirations are for technology.
A science fiction author, activist, journalist, and blogger, Cory has a new book out. It's called Radicalized. The book is broken up into 4 novellas, taking the social, political, technological, and economic issues of our time and imagining them in a not-so-far-off future or reality. From copyright protections to radical privatization, Cory Doctorow offers a provocative analysis of the role that technology plays in our lives and what it means for our future. He also has a lot to say about the newly passed European Copyright Directive and its alarming implications on the internet as we know it. Cory Doctorow, welcome to Intercepted.
It's sincerely a real pleasure. Thank you.
Do you envision the world that you are creating in this book as something that's happening in the near or distant future?
The 4 novellas are not directly linked. They're not all in the same future, but they're all pretty close by. Each one is not meant to be predictive. Like, I hate the idea that science fiction writers are fortune tellers. As an activist, I have to believe that the future is contestable, right? If it was predictable, I just wouldn't bother getting out of bed. So they're meant to be interventions rather than predictions. Things to make people angry or inspired or to take action. So, the first story, Unauthorized Bread, it's about a refugee in subsidized housing where all the appliances are designed to extract maximum revenue from her by making sure she only toasts authorized bread in the toaster and so on.
The Belangism cloud had burst, and that meant there was no one answering Salima's toaster when it asked if the bread she was about to toast had come from an authorized Belangism baker, which it had. In the absence of a reply, the paranoid little gadget would assume that Salima was in that class of nefarious fraudsters who bought a discounted Belangism toaster and then tried to renege on her end of the bargain by inserting unauthorized bread, with consequences ranging from kitchen fires to suboptimal toast.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the hedge funds that own these appliance companies go under because of their financial engineering, and then everything stops working.
The toaster wasn't the first appliance to go. That honor went to the dishwasher, which stopped being able to validate third-party dishes the week before when Disher went under.
And when they start jailbreaking things, it gets good to them and they feel like they're finally mastering their technology.
She tried to search her fridge for Belangism hacks and Belangism unlock codes, but appliances stuck together. KitchenAid's network filters gobbled up her queries and spat back snarky "no results" screens, even though Salima knew perfectly well that there was a whole underground economy devoted to unauthorized bread.
But then that puts them in harm's way because when the companies come back, then they can detect them with their telemetry, with their analytics.
Do you think we'll get in trouble? With the building, I mean? They own the appliances. Salima shrugged. They were getting a share of the money we spent before, for the special bread and soap and so on. But with both companies bankrupt, they won't be expecting any new money. Now, if the companies do ever come back from bankruptcy and still no one here is using their products, Nadifa nodded, that would definitely be trouble.
Once those companies come back from bankruptcy, then these people are in harm's way because the telemetry will detect their tinkering. And that's not fictionally, it is literally a felony under Section 12.1 of the DMCA, punishable by a 5-year prison sentence, to remove copyright protection systems from digital devices. And so, it's meant to make people think harder about the fact that now we have these tamper-resistant, illegal to tamper with systems in our cars and in our pacemakers and voting machines and so on, and that this is spreading very quietly, but throughout every piece of technology that we use and making it off limits to security auditors as well. And then there's this story, The Mask of the Red Death, which takes its title from this famous Edgar Allan Poe story. And it's about a rich prepper who's in his bunker with all of his friends.
Wait, first explain the term prepper.
Preppers, people who believe that the end of civilization is coming, and they build these spider holes. These sometimes they're very luxurious, and sometimes it's a cavern in the basement. It's a recurring motif in old science fiction. Heinlein loved to talk about people who had bomb shelters that were lovingly equipped for the future and so on.
Before the event, Martin Mars spent a lot of time trying to game it out. Would the collapse be sudden, catching him off guard and unprepared, having to fight his way to his fortress as he escaped from Paradise Valley and into the desert hills? Or would there be some kind of sign, a steady uptick in civil disorder and failures from the official powers that counted down to the day, giving him a chance to plan an orderly withdrawal to Fort Doom? This was important. If Martin spooked and ran for Fort Doom too early, he'd have to slink back to the city and his job after however many days he'd spent bunkered up. Not only would it be humiliating, but it would cost him credibility with the 30, the people he'd invited to survive the apocalypse with him. Once Fort Doom was buttoned up for the duration, he'd need to be a credible leader or he could lose control. Who the fuck knew what would happen next?
What's the ultimate fear that is driving the prepper?
I try to make it explicit. It's that he sits down and he kind of reasons it out. He says, look, the market is a thing that separates the worthy people from the unworthy people. And as we've had better information systems, we've had things like a sort of mating that has made the worthy people even more worthy. No longer does the genetic sport who just has the mutation that makes him into a job creator have to settle for, a doe-eyed milkmaid. He can hunt out his equals somewhere in the world by finding them. And eventually, like, everyone else becomes kind of redundant, surplus to needs, and we'll use automation to get rid of them. But then he reasons, if I were one of those people who were surplus to needs and I woke up one day and figured that was what was going on, I'd go out and, start building guillotines on the lawns of people like me, right? And so he's kind of done the game theory here and said, if I were surplus to requirements, I wouldn't take it lying down. I won't expect anyone else to do it. And so I'm waiting for them to come for me.
Martin knew that the event was coming. The fact was the world just didn't need all those people anymore. And the market had revealed that fact, squeezing them into tinier, more uncomfortable places. He wouldn't tolerate it if he was in their shoes. He'd be the first one to build a guillotine. And because he was Martin, it would be an awesome guillotine. So absolutely badass and over-engineered, with a turbocharger and a self-sharpening blade. Because that was Martin all the way. It's why Fort Doom was the incredible place it was.
This guy has got this whole Mad Max theory about how when civilization collapses, he'll wait for the pores to devour each other, and then he'll emerge and become a kind of warlord with his group of excellent, heavily armed Ubermenschen. And what he discovers is that we all have this shared microbial destiny, and that the real heroes of the revolution are the ones who are getting the sanitation working, not the ones hiding in the bunker. But he discovers that by getting cholera.
Martin felt his own guts clench, his own bowels turn to water. He had Cipro and other broad-spectrum last resort antibiotics, but he hadn't replaced them yet this year, and a bunch of them were expiring soon. He'd read that their efficacy would start to fall off a cliff when that happened. After a deliberate bioweapon attack, cholera was one of the fears that kept him up at night. He had lots of guns, but you can't shoot germs.
One of the elements that I really loved about Max Brooks' World War Z, the book, not the film, was a terrible adaptation of that book. And you touch on this too, and I find it such a rich point of inquiry that if you strip away all of the things that make unearned wealth the way that it is in our society, who are the most valuable people here? They're the people that know how to work with their hands, with their physical labor. And as you do here as well, it's like, you can be the wealthiest kingpin lawyer in the world, but when the fucking apocalypse comes, like, you're going to be hoping that those contractors that you hire to do stuff on your lawn are around to help you. I mean, that is the reality of, we're living in that kind of world now where it's like, it could break and a lot of people are going to be in deep shit. They don't even know how to unclog their toilet.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this Anglo-Canadian science and political writer, Lee Phillips, who wrote a great book called Austerity, Ecology, and the Collapse-Porn Addicts. That's about this kind of bright green communitarian or socialist future as distinct from the degrowth agenda. He's like, if your future starts with getting humanity down to 3 billion people, that's a lot of corpses lying around. And, we know that any event that reduces the population of humanity to 3 billion will create such scars and trauma and disease and what have you, and leave you with a skeleton crew too small to work the systems, that it could be a tipping point into, centuries of barbarism. The only way to a green future is up and through. Kim Stanley Robinson writes about this, that we should get people into big cities, away from natural habitats, into high density environments where we can share, resources and so on. That's the most efficient future we have. It's trying to counter that pastoral kind of Tory bougie version of the future that like someday we will attain a kind of paradise where we all wear leather aprons and work our small holdings and, and craft through the days. That's a vacation, but it's not a future.
There are those people that take to the extreme, that have their bunkers, that are collecting their medicines and their Bitcoin and their weapons, etc. But even on just a slow growth level, the radical privatization agenda in this society, where you have some communities that are going to have privatized firefighting forces, private security, private access to water supply. That is the real world now. And in a way, it is, the preppers take it kind of to the extreme, but it's already seeping into every aspect of our life, right?
Larry Lessig, he talks about the world being influenced by like code, what's technologically possible, law, what's legal, norms, what's lawful, and markets, what's profitable. And if you think of like, say, the Mont Pelerin Society as having used those 4 tools to try and change us, one of the changes has been this normative shift, right? Through market and legal mechanisms, we've arrived at a normative moment in which it can sound reasonable to say, what makes you say that you have the right to clean drinking water? If you can't afford it, what entitles you to it? It's a kind of tautological thing. The thing that entitles you to it is affording it. And if you can afford it, you're entitled to it. It's this idea that we don't have a shared destiny. And, that's part of the point of the Mask of the Red Death, is that giant mountains of corpses are a public health problem. Like, leaving aside all of the ethical questions about giant mountains of corpses will kill you dead by seeping into the water supply and by, vectorizing all kinds of diseases that emerge in rotting flesh and so on. It is not nice to be surrounded by rotting corpses. And I think that, in the like kind of late 20th century, early 21st century climate debate, where we've arrived at least among some elites, is this belief that climate change is probably real, but given enough mountaintops and Harrier jets, you can just sort of build a, big fence around your high ground and just crossbreed your children by supersonic jet. All the dying poor people will be so far down the slope that you won't even have to smell them. And this is just clearly wrong, right? Just as like a factual matter, that's not going to be a nice existence.
I want to ask you about a couple of companies and get your read on the role they play in our life and our society, but also like what you think their ultimate end game is. I want to start with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook.
I think you can draw like a little 2x2 grid, like venture capitalists like to draw.